Welcome to the Speak English podcast. Listen, learn, and speak with confidence.
Imagine for a second that you just spent an entire month reading this, just a devastating 800-page historical memoir about war and loss.
Oh, wow. That is a heavy read.
Right, it's grueling, but it fundamentally moves you. So a few days later, you're at a dinner party and a colleague asks what you've been reading.
Naturally.
And you get all enthusiastic and say, "Oh, I just finished this incredible war memoir. It was a total page-turner."
Oh, no.
Yeah. Without even realizing it, you have just committed a massive conversational blunder. You've basically signaled to the whole table that you might not actually understand the emotional texture of the book you just spent a month of your life reading.
It is, it's such a common trap, though. Like, we reach for these familiar phrases of praise without really realizing the specific psychological weight they carry, which is exactly why the source material we're unpacking today is just so revelatory.
Absolutely. So welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're exploring a fascinating breakdown titled Talking About a Book You Read. And for you, the listener, the mission today isn't just to, hand you a list of English vocabulary words to memorize.
Right, that would be pretty boring.
Exactly. Instead, we're going to decode the hidden psychology behind how native speakers discuss the actual visceral experience of reading. Because our source points out a fundamental difference in how we consume media. Like, book conversations are entirely different from movie conversations.
Yeah, they really are. Think about it. When you walk out of a movie theater with your friends, the conversation almost immediately becomes a structural critique. Right?
Totally.
You talk about the pacing or the lighting or how the plot just completely fell apart in the third act.
Yeah.
You're all standing around inspecting an external object together. It's almost like mechanics looking under the hood of a car.
Right. It's safe. It's totally objective. Wait, so you're saying that if I talk about a movie, I get to play the detached critic? But if I talk about a book, I'm suddenly like the patient on the therapist's couch describing my symptoms.
That is exactly the paradigm shift the source highlights. Reading isn't an external experience. It's an intensely, almost fiercely internal one. When people talk about books, they aren't just recounting what happened in the plot.
Right. They're trying to explain how it felt.
Exactly. They're trying to articulate how the book made them feel while they were living inside of it. You are the projector. The language we use to describe reading isn't primarily about the author's craft. It's about the psychological and physical state of the reader.
That distinction changes everything about how we should be navigating these conversations. And I promise you, by the time we finish this deep dive, you are never going to fall back on that generic conversation-killing, "Oh, it was a really good book" response ever again.
Yeah, we're going to kill that phrase today.
Yeah. We really are. You are going to walk away with a highly precise, socially attuned framework. You'll know how to sound insightful, credible, and genuinely engaging the next time someone asks you what you're reading. But to get there, we kind of have to start by drawing a hard line in the sand between books that manipulate your heart rate and books that manipulate your emotions.
Which is the perfect place to start. Because if the vocabulary of reading is all about the internal experience, we have to recognize that different types of books provoke completely different biological reactions. And our vocabulary, well, it needs to reflect that physical reality.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the first concept our source gives us is essentially the holy grail of casual book praise, the page-turner.
Ah, yes. The classic.
Now, a page-turner is exactly what it sounds like, right? It's a book that is so exciting, so relentlessly engaging, that you physically struggle to close the cover.
It's the literal definition of telling yourself, okay, just one more chapter.
And suddenly you look at the clock and it's 2 a.m. and you have to be at work in 4 hours.
Exactly. And calling a book a page-turner is widely considered one of the highest compliments a book can get in casual conversation. But the psychological mechanism behind why we use that word is actually quite subtle.
How so?
Well, when you call a book a page-turner, you are entirely emphasizing the momentum of the experience. You are not necessarily vouching for the quality of the literature itself.
Oh, right. I was thinking about the mechanics of this, and the best analogy I can come up with is that reading a page-turner is basically an involuntary reflex. It's like eating potato chips.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Like when you open a bag of really good, salty, crunchy potato chips, you aren't sitting there pondering the culinary genius of the potato.
No, definitely not. You're just eating them.
Right. You aren't analyzing the chef's intent. Your hand just physically cannot stop moving from the bag to your mouth. the momentum completely overrides your conscious brain.
Yeah.
And that's what a page-turner is. It's a thriller, a murder mystery, a fast-moving plot where the book physically compels your hands to keep turning the pages.
That involuntary reflex is key. And because the term is so deeply tied to pace and sheer velocity, it belongs to a very specific category of reading. But here's where the source makes a crucial, very nuanced distinction.
What's fascinating here is how it splits the vocabulary, right?
Exactly. It explicitly separates the page-turner from another common word that people often mistakenly use interchangeably. And that word is gripping.
Which is funny because they do sound like they mean the exact same thing on the surface.
They do, but psychologically they are completely different. Gripping is a much broader, heavier kind of engaging.
Right.
While a page-turner is almost always a fast, plot-driven read that you race through, a gripping book can be incredibly slow. It can be a dense, serious literary work. It could be a gripping memoir, a gripping historical account, or just a very quiet, slow-paced character study.
So the tension doesn't come from the speed.
No, not at all. The tension in a gripping book doesn't come from the speed of the plot. It comes from emotional depth. It comes from incredibly high stakes that literally hold you in place.
Okay, let me challenge this with a real-world scenario, going back to the example we started with. Let's say I read that massive 800-page, incredibly slow, emotionally devastating novel about grief.
Okay, I'm with you.
It took me an entire month to get through it because it was so heavy, but it completely held my attention the whole time. If I'm at that dinner party and I call that heavy, slow book a page-turner, why is that such a massive conversational blunder? Like, what's actually happening there?
It all comes down to the native speaker psychology attached to the word. The source explicitly notes that calling a slow, emotionally heavy book a page-turner sounds immediately off to native ears.
Just because it implies speed. And you don't speed read grief.
Exactly. You don't speed read grief.
Yeah.
Page-turner implies velocity and entertainment.
Yeah.
If the book took you a month to read because it was so emotionally dense that you had to frequently put it down and take a walk to process it, it was definitively not a page-turner.
But it was gripping.
It was gripping. It held you. It gripped your emotions without making you race through the text. And knowing that difference isn't just about passing a vocabulary test, it's a massive conversational flex.
Yeah, it's really about social capital.
Precisely. When you consciously choose the word gripping over page-turner to describe a serious book, you are subconsciously signaling to the other person that you truly understand the texture of the work.
You're basically saying, this book didn't entertain me with cheap thrills. It held me hostage with its emotional weight.
Yes, that signals true conversational mastery, and it proves you are a thoughtful reader.
I love that idea, though. A book holding you hostage versus pushing you forward. Because a crime thriller can absolutely be both a page-turner and gripping, right?
Oh, definitely. They aren't mutually exclusive.
But a devastating war memoir is only gripping. You don't eat a war memoir like potato chips.
No, you really shouldn't.
So, okay, we've covered books that hijack your nervous system to keep you awake and books that grip your emotions. But what about books where the goal isn't to entertain you or hold you in suspense at all? Like, what happens when you're reading something whose entire purpose is to rewire your brain?
Well, this raises an important question because that requires a completely different set of conversational tools. How do we adequately praise a dense piece of nonfiction or a highly philosophical book without using vocabulary that was designed for fiction?
Right. I mean, imagine you spend 3 weeks reading a dense 500-page book on the history of behavioral economics.
A thrilling topic, obviously.
Naturally. But if you go to a dinner party and call that textbook a page-turner, people are going to look at you like you're completely unhinged.
Unless you are terrifyingly passionate about behavioral economics, it just sounds like a lie.
It really does. We need a word that conveys value without implying adrenaline.
And the source provides the perfect designated word for intellectual reward. Insightful. If page-turner and gripping are about entertainment and emotional momentum, insightful is entirely about understanding.
It's a completely different vibe.
It is. An insightful book doesn't necessarily keep you up turning pages in a frenzy. Instead, it gives you a new framework. It fundamentally changes how you perceive a specific topic.
I really want the listener to hear the stark contrast between these types of praise, because this is where conversational precision really shines. Our source compares 2 specific sentences to illustrate this, and the first one is, "It was such a gripping read, I couldn't put it down."
Classic emotional response.
And the second is, it was really insightful. It completely changed how I think.
Both are incredibly strong compliments. But notice how they describe two radically different internal states. One is about being emotionally captivated, and the other is about being intellectually transformed.
And for you, the listener, consciously choosing insightful over a generic, oh, it was a good book, does something kind of magical to your credibility in a conversation. It lets your peers know exactly why the book had value to you.
It's very precise.
It is. If you tell a colleague a book was insightful, you are implicitly telling them, I walked away from this book a slightly different, smarter person. It elevates the whole conversation. It shows that you aren't just consuming media passively, you are actively analyzing your own intellectual diet.
It demonstrates a high level of self-awareness, which actually leads us perfectly into the next psychological layer of how we talk about books.
Here's where it gets really interesting, folks.
Yeah, because if our reading experiences are this varied, ranging from thrilling page-turners to gripping emotional dramas to insightful nonfiction, our personal tastes are inevitably going to shift between them. You don't just stay in one lane forever.
This is a really crucial point. Our tastes are constantly in flux, and the source highlights a specific phrase native speakers use to describe this evolution seamlessly without, painting themselves into a corner. And the phrase is drawn to, meaning attracted to or currently interested in something.
Yes. For example, a native speaker might say, I've been more drawn to nonfiction lately. Or, I used to read a lot of epic fantasy, but recently I'm really drawn to short story collections.
When I was looking at this phrase, I realized how much heavy lifting those two little words do. Because claiming a specific genre, saying something like, I am a sci-fi reader, it's almost like signing a rigid social contract.
Oh, absolutely. It's an identity marker.
Right. And if you suddenly decide to read a cheesy romance novel, you've somehow breached your own contract. It feels restrictive. But saying, I'm drawn to sci-fi right now is entirely different.
It gives you an out.
Exactly. It's more like renting an apartment rather than buying a house. You live there right now, you enjoy the neighborhood, but you haven't locked yourself into a 30-year mortgage. You have a built-in exit strategy.
That renting versus buying metaphor perfectly captures the psychology the source is pointing out. Native English speakers instinctively avoid using absolute fixed terms for their reading hobbies. They rarely say, I only read nonfiction, or I despise fiction.
Because it sounds too aggressive.
It sounds too rigid and honestly a bit arrogant. Drawn to acts as a subtle conversational hedge.
A hedge, yes. It protects your future choices.
Exactly. It frames your preference as a current temporary trend. It accurately captures where your taste exists right in this moment, but it quietly leaves the door wide open for that taste to shift again next month.
Which is just more human, really.
It is. Psychologically, that sounds far more authentic to the person you're talking to, because human taste does evolve. We all go through phases based on what's happening in our lives. By using drawn to, you sound natural, reflective, and completely unpretentious.
It's so much more honest than claiming you have this rigid, unchanging identity as a reader. And actually, to take that a step further, that exact same psychological principle, the absolute necessity of avoiding rigid, absolute statements, applies directly to the single most dangerous part of any book conversation.
Oh, you mean recommending a book to someone else?
Yes, recommending a book.
It really is a conversational minefield. Recommending art to another human being is incredibly risky.
It is, because we've all made this mistake. We read a book that completely blows our mind, we are riding that post-book high, and we walk up to a friend and aggressively deploy what I call the universal claim. We say, oh my gosh, you have to read this. Everyone on earth should read this book.
And the source specifically warns against that exact phrasing. It's a massive trap.
It really is. Contrast that universal claim with what the text calls audience-specific framing. Instead of saying everyone should read this, the source suggests you say something like, I think anyone trying to build better habits would find this really useful, or if you enjoy slow burn mysteries, this one is fantastic.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we really need to dig into the mechanism of why the universal claim fails so badly.
Yeah, let's break that down.
If we look at the psychology of how human beings build trust in conversation, native speakers are instinctively skeptical of universal claims. When you say, everyone must read this book, you sound wildly overconfident.
Because obviously not everyone is going to like the same thing.
Right. But worse than that, it actually threatens the listener's sense of individual identity and agency.
Wait, because it implies that if they don't like it, there is something wrong with them.
Precisely. If you declare a book universally perfect and your friend reads it and hates it, you've accidentally created a social conflict. Furthermore, your friend's brain immediately throws up a tiny defensive shield when you make a universal claim, because we all know instinctively that no single book suits every single reader.
Right. It's like enthusiastically telling your friends, everyone should wear this exact pair of running shoes. Like, no, people have different size feet. People run on different terrain.
So true. When you issue an unqualified recommendation, you prove that you haven't actually considered the other person's needs. But by utilizing audience-specific framing, by naming a specific audience, like saying, I'd highly recommend this to anyone going through a big life transition, you prove that you have actually analyzed the book's mechanics.
You're showing your work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You've thought deeply about who the author structurally designed it for.
And that completely disarms the listener's defensive shield. It instantly makes your recommendation feel genuine, thoughtful, and incredibly trustworthy. It shows high-level empathy, really. You aren't just shouting your subjective opinion as objective fact. You are acting as a thoughtful matchmaker between a piece of art and the right human being.
Matchmaker is the perfect word for it. Look at the source's primary example for this. It suggests saying, this one's probably not for everyone, but if you enjoy slow, character-driven stories, you'd really like it.
That phrasing makes me trust you completely because you just willingly admitted the book has limitations. It's a sign of conversational maturity. You are openly recognizing that the reading experience is subjective, which immediately makes the other person feel safe taking your recommendation.
Okay, so what does this all mean? If we zoom out and look at everything we've just unpacked from this text, we actually have a complete psychological roadmap for having the perfect book conversation.
We really do.
Our source calls it the 5-layer framework. But rather than just listing it out like a textbook, if we put this whole toolkit together, you can actually see how organically a perfect book conversation flows.
It moves so beautifully from the superficial facts to a deeply personal connection.
Exactly. Picture the ideal conversation in motion. You start with the simple baseline, you just state what you recently read, but then you don't just dump the plot on them like middle school book report.
No, please don't do that.
Right. You immediately pivot to the internal experience. Was it a page-turner that ruined your sleep schedule? Was it a gripping emotional journey? Was it a highly insightful look at a topic you knew nothing about? You set the internal stage first.
And only then do you give a brief, spoiler-light description of the plot. You give just enough context so they know what world the book exists in without ruining the magic.
From there, you get reflective. You pull out that renting versus buying metaphor we talked about. You use drawn to show that your tastes are evolving. Like, I usually read sci-fi, but lately I've been really drawn to historical biographies. It makes you sound dynamic.
And very self-aware.
Definitely. And you cap the whole thing off by acting as that matchmaker. You don't dictate that everyone must read it. You look at the person in front of you and say, if you're into X, you will absolutely love this.
It's a brilliant conversational structure. It ensures you're engaging in a dynamic psychological exchange about art, identity, and preference, rather than just reciting facts.
And to you, the listener, the real power here is that you now have this entire toolkit at your disposal. You have the exact vocabulary and the underlying psychological framing to analyze your own reading habits. More importantly, you know how to share those habits in a way that builds immense social capital and credibility. You never have to settle for, it was good. You can articulate the exact shape of your internal reading experience.
Which kind of brings us full circle back to that core premise we started with.
Oh, the movie versus book thing.
Yeah, the idea that talking about movies is an external critique, but talking about books is an internal revelation. Because if our entire vocabulary for books is so deeply rooted in our own physical and emotional states, I mean, if the highest praise we have is whether our bodies felt compelled or our emotions were gripped or whether our personal identities were suddenly drawn to a new genre.
Yes. Where does that leave us?
Well, it raises a rather profound question. Does that make reading the most deeply personal, almost selfish form of media we consume? Think about the mechanics of a recommendation. When we use all this highly precise language to recommend a book to a friend, are we actually recommending the text itself? Or are we just secretly hoping to find someone who will replicate our exact psychological state so we don't have to feel alone in it?
Oh, wow. That is a heavy existential question.
Right.
Are we just looking for someone to occupy the same internal room we just left? That completely reframes the entire concept of sharing a book. And that is definitely something for you to ponder the next time you try to convince your best friend to read your favorite gripping, page-turning, incredibly insightful book.